Yes, and thank you so much for taking your time to be with us here today. We're really glad to welcome all of you for our town hall to discuss the UC financial plan that has come out and also to discuss the tuition and the student services fee proposal that has come up so far. Today's town hall for us today, we have our esteemed panelists to discuss the tuition proposal with our campus. And all of you today, we have our Chancellor Gilman. Thank you so much for being here. We have Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs, Thomas Parham. We also have Vice Chancellor of Planning and Budget, Meredith Michaels. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with all of us here today and speak with us about the tuition plan.
And we are also live streaming this event as well. So there's a link on the ASUCI page on the homepage allowing for live stream as well. So everything is being recorded now and will be posted later in its entirety as well. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and allow our panelists to go ahead and get up on stage. And to let you all know a little bit about our format, we have a little bit, our panelists have prepared some information for you all to go over, and then we will go right into questions from there. So, and also before I forget, we have Nick right there and then Alvin right there. They both have mics as well, so they'll be going around the room accepting questions from you all. So go ahead and raise your hand, and depending on where you are, Nick or Alvin will come to you. All right, thank you very much, everyone.
Great, thanks, Reza, thanks. Mic check, mic check. Thanks, Sonali. Thanks, Reza. Thanks all of you being here. Thanks for making this possible to do it at a time when we could be here. We've all talked a little bit. We all thought that it would be a good idea for me to take just a couple of minutes just to make sure we know what we're talking about. What is the plan? What are some issues relating to the plan? I want to try to get through this as quickly as possible so that we can have a good dialogue. And so let me start actually by setting the scene. And I want to set the scene by showing you a graph. And this is not a University of California graph. It's not prepared by my office. It's prepared by our organization called the Public Policy Institute of California. They just came out with a study a month ago, so you can Google Public Policy Institute of California Higher Ed Study. And it's designed to explore the issue of what have been the major drivers over time of tuition increases within the University of California and the Cal State system. They looked at a lot of different data. They looked at questions about administrative structures. They looked at questions of different efficiencies. They've concluded what you know intuitively to be true, that fundamentally, the main thing that is driving tuition increases is that the state of California has dramatically reduced its support of your education. So this shows over a 30-year period. The University of California is in gold. The Cal States are in the darker color. The per-student funding that the state of California provides for your education, it's at a 30-year low. To put the point another way, and this is the one number that I'm going to try to encourage you to remember, I'll say it a couple of times, but between 2007 and today, the amount of money that the state of California provides to support your education is $460 million less. There has been almost a $500 million cut in the dollars that the state of California provides for your education. $500 million. That's even with the University of California educating more students, including more California residents. And the conclusion of that study was that tuition increases are driven by dramatic reductions in state subsidies to UC and CSU. Now, I want to use this as the starting slide because by the time we get to the end, the main point that I want to make is that fundamentally the way that you address this issue is that you encourage the state to recommit to the greatest system of public higher education that the world has ever seen. The glory of the state of California is the University of California system. Generations and generations of families have benefited from this system. We're actually at a stage right now where for the first time, an increasingly diverse group of students are coming into the system. And the idea that at this time, the state would decide that they don't need to support the system at as high a level as was the case back in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, that's what we're trying to fight. We're trying to create a plan that encourages the state to see the relationship between state support and tuition, with the hope that once that issue is made clear, we can work together to get the state to begin to walk down that path of the sort of support that the University of California system deserves. Now, what happens when you dramatically reduce state funding? So in 2000-2001, this chart shows how much support of your education is provided by the state and provided by tuition. State is dark blue, tuition light blue. In 2000-2001, the state by far supported your education at the highest level, and only a relatively small amount of the total funds necessary to provide you with an outstanding education were provided by tuition. What happened after all of those dramatic cuts in state support, and especially the $460 million less of state support now compared to 2007? This is as of last year. More of the support of your education is now borne by you and your families than the state. State divestment, burden falls on families, and tuition rises. So you might think, well, now that the state is more flush, there are, in fact, billions of surplus dollars coming into the state now beyond what was projected. And since times were tough for a while, but now that the economy is a little bit better, maybe there's an interest in increasing state support. And in fact, in the California legislature, there has been an interest in increasing state support, but that has been vetoed by the governor. Last year, the state legislature tried to give us an extra $50 million, an extra $100 million, and the governor didn't allow it. So why would it be the case that there might be some folks, some elected officials, who don't want to increase state support? What the governor said at the Regents meeting in explaining why he didn't support additional revenue beyond the very small amount of additional revenue he's already agreed to is that he wants the University of California to change. And what he said was, we should be more of an online university. We should have fewer 4-year degrees and focus instead on 2-year and 3-year degrees. And faculty should do less research. Online, 2- and 3-year degrees rather than 4-year experiences, faculty doing less research. And it's for that reason that when the Los Angeles Times did an editorial about this a few weeks ago, the way they framed the issue that is at stake is that this is a battle over the soul of the University of California. Their point of view is that the governor has not given adequate recognition to the University of California's historic and current role within our 3-tiered system of higher ed. In other words, he's treating us as if we're more like the community college system and the Cal State system. And the reason why he doesn't want to provide additional support is that he wants to move us in what he considers to be a more economically efficient direction, but in a way that, according to the LA Times, doesn't recognize what the University of California is. The LA Times notes that the University of California was to be the jewel in the crown, a world-class research university. The whole idea of the master plan was that California's sons and daughters should not have to go to the East Coast to have a world-class research university education. That we as a state were wealthy enough, bold enough, idealistic enough to provide that ourselves. But that meant bringing the best professors, doing the best research, making our contributions to fundamental knowledge, to professional practice, but doing it in a way that served the people of California in an accessible way. Los Angeles Times said, UC should not be pressed to become mostly a 2-year undergraduate program. And I agree with that. Students seeking a top 4-year university would flee the state. Of course, you know that's right. Because why did you choose to come to one of the great research universities of the world? It was to get the kind of experience that was originally envisioned in the master plan. Moreover, Los Angeles Times says, professors should not be required to reduce research publications lest the state lose them as well. If you're one of our great faculty members and you came here, not only because of their commitment to your education, this university's commitment to being a world-class research university, the governor's plan is for those faculty not to have to worry so much about research. Teach more classes, teach more online classes. So the Los Angeles Times says this is about a battle for UC's soul. So the plan that I'm going to briefly describe to you can be contrasted with what the governor says up till now, and we think we can help educate him about this, that maybe his vision isn't right for California. The plan is to accomplish the original goal of the University of California, provide the University of California with the resources necessary to be a great world-class research university. And it contrasts with the governor's idea about how we should develop. We want to increase the number of students who have access to the University of California by 5,000 students. One of the things that the Cal State University system did when they suffered big cuts is that they said to the state, well, you're not going to support us? We're cutting 22,000 California residents out of the Cal State system. The University of California worked hard to maintain California resident access, and we want to expand access of California residents. The governor, though, in a number of occasions has said that he's not an advocate for increasing numbers of students to come into the system as it currently exists. We want to make sure, with these new students coming in, many of whom are Hispanic, Latino, Latina, we, in fact, probably next year, UCI, will be the first AAU research university that is also a Hispanic-serving institution, and we're very proud of that. The number of first-generation students we have, more than half of our students, the number of low-income students, we want to be that institution, but also world-class. The governor, by not allowing as many students in, necessarily will have as an impact a less diverse student body, a student body that has fewer low-income first-generation students. And we're trying to fight for that identity not only of excellence, but of access and social mobility. And we want to maintain UC's quality against an argument that we should have fewer four-year degrees, provide more online classes, and have faculty do less research. I'm going to skip that slide. I want to show you the elements of the plan. We think to deal with that $460 million difference between what we were funded at in 2007 and now, we need to identify new resources for the system to get us out of that hole. So the plan is either an increase in tuition for some, or, and this is the most important part of the plan, if the state doesn't want that to happen, and the state shouldn't want that to happen, and I don't want that to happen, and you don't want that to happen, the state can give us $100 million beyond what the governor proposed. $100 million in the context of billions of surplus dollars, and there's going to be zero tuition increase. But if the state doesn't give us $100 million to begin moving toward higher investment, we do contemplate some additional tuition combined with a dramatic recommitment to the best financial aid policy in higher ed. A financial aid policy that has guaranteed over even the last few years that the University of California trains more low-income students than any other institution in higher education. So what does that look like? You already know that if you and your families make $80,000 a year or less, you pay zero tuition. It's an extraordinary thing, one of the great things about the University of California. There really is no other plan such as that in American higher education. So a 5% increase on zero is still zero. If you make $80,000 a year or less, this doesn't affect you at all. What happens if you make $100,000 a year under this plan? Because this plan has additional revenue coming in, but also additional financial aid, the yellow is the tuition that you would pay over the 4 years of the plan. So if you and your family make $100,000 a year, under this tuition increase plan, you will pay less tuition. If you make $125,000 a year as a family, under this tuition plan, you will pay less tuition at the end of 4 years than now. If you make $150,000 a year, you will see small increases in tuition, but not 5%. The only families that will pay 5% more next year, if the state doesn't give us more money, the only families that will pay $612 more next year make $175,000 a year or more. Now, I think that they shouldn't pay any more. I want the state to give us the $100 million. But the idea that this plan is a tuition increase for everybody, that we're not committed to access, that this is going to close the door, it makes things a bit harder on families that make $175,000 a year or more. I don't want to trivialize what $612 a year would mean for those families. But it's a much more sophisticated story than just everyone's going to see their tuition increase. Lots of people are going to get hurt, especially the least well off. Actually, under this plan, your family makes $100,000 a year, you're going to pay less tuition. Makes it hard to talk in sound bites about a 5% tuition increase if one of the implications of a 5% tuition increase is that you're paying less tuition, or that families making $80,000 a year or less pay zero tuition. But this is what it would look like, the actual impact. I don't want to trivialize this impact for families making $175,000 a year or more, but this is a very important slide to keep in mind because it's not just tuition increase, it's a dramatic recommitment to our commitment to access through financial aid. If we get additional resources, whether it's through this tuition plan or what I hope and expect by the state giving us an extra $100 million or some portion of that, what do we do with it? We've been working with your student leaders for the past few months. And our commitment from the beginning is this whole point is to reinvest in academic greatness and quality and into the quality of your experience. So we've already indicated in the one note that I circulated initially about the plan that we're going to be allocating resources to improving the quality of your education, increasing course offerings, more personalized instruction, greater access to mental health services for your support, more proactive academic counseling to keep you on track to graduate. And we've made a commitment as we work together because we think we're going to have additional resources to further enhance the greatest university experience people can have, that we're going to work together and report to you as a group, my office, your student leaders, about decisions we're making about how these additional funds are going to be used to support your education. So even if we get to a point where some of you and your families have to pay $612 or more next year, and that's not most of you. But even if we got to that point, we need to say to those families, you're going to get something for that $612 because we need to begin to reinvest in the greatness and of the quality of the academic experience here. But, and this will be my final slide, the point of this plan is not to raise tuition. The point is to clarify to the world the relationship between tuition increases and the lack of state support. Last year, as I told you, the legislature tried to give us more money, and the governor said no. When the governor said no, that was the easiest decision the governor ever made. You weren't worried about it. Nobody was saying to the governor, but we think you're going to erode access. Nobody was saying to the governor, but this is a great institution. Why are you pushing it in one direction as opposed to another? Nobody said, but don't you know part of the long-term impact of you refusing to continue to invest in the education of California's sons and daughters is that it's going to put upward pressure on tuition? Nobody said that. He just said, I'm not doing it, moved on. Because this plan says it's either a tuition increase or the state can buy it out, that provides the necessary focus, which means things can be different this year compared to last year. Because now we have a focused conversation on what needs to happen. And whatever else you think might be true about where tuition is, what drives it, if you can get the state to start filling that $460 million gap, then we're going to be fine. There doesn't have to be tuition increases. And that's not me just saying that. Your student regent says the same thing. Sadia, who has done extraordinary work, and if you had a chance to watch her at the regents meeting, it was really a marvel to watch. She is an absolutely passionate and brilliant advocate for your cause. The governor tried to get a couple of applause lines about not allowing any tuition increase. It was Sadia who said, Governor, it's easy to get an applause line, but where have you been when we've asked for your support to continue to develop the greatest public research university system in the world? She said to him, when he said, you need more online, you need more two-year degrees, you need fewer research, she said to him, students do not want an online classroom to supplant the university. They want a four-year institution. She said, the UC cannot do its job without the state's support and funding. The amount of money that the state has reduced from our budget over the last 20 years has crippled the system. And now the UC is forced into a position that, frankly, none of us want to be in. This position of saying, give us more money, otherwise to preserve the strength of the system, we need to think about a tuition increase. And she said, we need to work together to create a plan that restores state support for the UC. What I'm here to tell you is, whatever other disagreements we might have about this is something I agree with completely. This is something that I think your student leadership agrees with completely, what your region agrees with completely. And the solution to this problem is for us to work together to convince Sacramento to create a new day, start walking down that path. And the sign is good. There's already a little chatter in Sacramento. We got an initial bid out of the Speaker of the Assembly, $50 million additional dollars. This string, that string, this string, that string. But it's an initial ante of more money. State Senate, $75 million. This string, that string, this string, that string. But all of the electeds are saying, we need to figure out how to prevent this from happening. And that's where we all agree. I believe that the governor will be in a position to deepen his conversation with the system in light of the attention that this has brought. And my hope and expectation is, for all of the anxiety about this plan, this is the best chance we have to get the state to start walking down that path to support the greatest system of public higher education that has ever been created. I'm confident that we're not going to see a 5% increase, because I'm hopeful that this develops in a much more positive way, especially if we work together. But even if the state decides not to support, I hope you can see that a worst case scenario, and there is a 5% increase, is not an across-the-board 5%. It's not unmindful of our commitment to diversity. It's not unmindful of our commitment to social justice, social mobility. But let's avoid that outcome and get the state to support. So I hope that's helpful, and I'm looking forward to the questions and comments and conversations to follow. So thanks for letting me speak. I really appreciate it a lot. Let's talk.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and start opening it up to questions. So Alvin and Nick, if you all want to start siphoning through the room. So just for some of the logistics for getting the questions through, and so we can provide for the questions in the room, try and keep your question under 2 minutes, and that should be perfect. Thank you very much.
We'll have one mic going from the back and one mic in the front, so people have an equal opportunity to participate.
Mic check.
It's okay. I have a lot of voice. So my name is Sana. I am a member of our student government, but I'm also a political science student. So I'm interested in this conversation not only as someone who works in education policy, but as someone who's fascinated by the state's political system. So what I've noticed is the cost of tuition increase goes beyond the $612. It includes maybe alienating the Senate support, because the Senate proposed plan includes the potential to lose the middle class scholarship, which means that families who earn between $100,000 and $125,000 would still end up paying a significant amount more. It also includes the potential to lose students on your side, because I think students do feel like they're being used as political leverage by the state and also by the UC. So I'm just wondering, what is the UC's political strategy to combat all these other problems that the proposed tuition increase has created?
Thank you very much. So every degree I ever earned was in political science, and so, I'm especially interested and intrigued by the politics of this. One thing, and I'll say, by the way, just in a preliminary way, is whatever else you think about the president of the University of California, the University of California has never had a president who has more experience working with a state capital and working with a governor. So if we were ever going to take the issue to the state, to start the conversation about what's in the best interest of California, it feels to me like this is the time to try to do it. Last year, we played a very inside the Beltway strategy to try to get the state to give us some more funds. Briefings, nice and quiet, PowerPoints, conversations with state legislative leaders and the governor. And we convinced the state legislature, and we didn't convince the governor. And one definition of insanity is continue to do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. And so we have to be realistic. There is a political context that pre-existed this plan that was not conducive to the state beginning to reinvest in the University of California. And so what do you do when the political context doesn't seem to be there to make the case? You all weren't advocating for the governor. Nobody was looking at the basic relationship between the level of state support and the pressure that places on tuition. Sure. So my mistake, and I guess the way that I would want to put it is, we had a lot of conversations, but it was inside the Beltway. We were talking, we were advocating. All of us have been advocating. I spent a number of days up in Sacramento meeting with state legislators, but we know that we weren't successful last year. And so I do think that the fundamental reality of what in the long run is going to drive tuition is going to be how much or how little the state supports the system. What this plan does is that it clarifies what's true. Right? If the state does not begin to take that step toward us getting back even to the 2007 level, then it's inevitable, as independent analyses have determined, it's inevitable that there's going to be pressure on tuition. And in fact, as we've seen over the years, at some point the dam will break and you have to contemplate a 30%, 40% tuition increase. This, at least, it's straightforward, it's predictable, and I think it creates a good backstop, a good backdrop for a more productive political conversation this year versus last. Now, some of the elected officials have said a couple of things that maybe they're a little grumpy that this has happened. They've all said a number of things, right? So some of them have said, well, maybe we should just pull the 1.7% increase that the governor has already agreed to. So maybe they're going to do that. I don't think so, but I guess it's obviously a possibility. You got one or two people saying, this really means that we have to change the constitutional autonomy of the University of California. Do I think that's going to get traction? I don't think it's going to get traction, but it has started the conversation. I think that the leadership in the state assembly and the state senate wants to do a deal that will prevent this from happening. And I think that there's going to be a negotiation. And I think that the results of this negotiation are going to be more productive this year than they were last year. There's a little bit more attention, and maybe the governor, there's a little heightened saliency to it. So is there some risk? It's possible that there's some risk. But we were in a bad position before, and sometimes you need to shuffle the deck. And I think we've created a salient issue for the state, and I think the people of the state are behind the greatness of this system. And if it's not successful, we'd be back to where we were before, because the other thing that's still at stake is, if you didn't do anything, what was at stake is the future of the University of California and what it stands for. And so from my point of view, that's still worth fighting for, because the vision that was driving Sacramento over the last few years is not a future I think that any one of us want to see for us, for our children and grandchildren. And at some point, you have to try to clarify that as clearly as you can. And you hope that the people rally around you, and that's my hope and expectation. I think there's going to be a deal. It's risky, but not doing anything was risky too. Thanks for the question.
So just go ahead and put your hand up and signal to Alvin if you have a question. And Nick.
Hello, my name is Parshan. Major is poli-sci. So while the code is up there, I actually would really want to point out, first of all, Sadia voted no on this plan.
Yeah.
Just for the records, while these quotes are put into showing some sort of support for the plan, I do know for a fact that it was, I'm not by any means saying that this is for any particular reason, but I do want to point out that this slide is talking about students' perspectives, and quoting Sadia as a representative. While we had hundreds of students out there throughout the past month protesting and trying to show their perspectives up there. So I'm wondering why those perspectives are not there and not shown. Now that aside, I do want to go back to one of the slides, particularly if we could go back to the slide that talks about the charts for the income levels.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what happened to the chart for the 80,000 to the 100,000
Yeah.
that wasn't up there.
Yeah.
Number one, and number two, just as a point, what I'm trying to understand is the reason that the 100 to 125,000, both of those incomes are going down is because in a very large effect because of Middle Class Scholarship Act, which was, by the way, passed by the students' efforts through UCSA. So let's not forget that as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But also quoting what happens, and as Janet Napolitano has quoted the new states plan for kind of taking away that 5% increase, a very good step, first step, and that's something that I've been hearing a lot. That very good first step is taking away that Middle Class Scholarship Act. So how is that going to look when that Middle Class Scholarship Act is no longer there?
Excellent. Let me start with easy and then get to the other one. Why is the $80,000 not there? Because you don't pay any tuition with $80,000. 82. And so we can give you all the data. If you want to know what 90 is, what 96 is, we can get you all that data. This was just an easy way for 100, 125, 150, 175 to kind of show that it has a differential impact. 80 itself wasn't there because we weren't talking about people who pay no tuition. We were trying to say if you pay tuition now and you have a family income of $100,000, this is what's going to be true for you. Any other data that you would want to try to refine it, we can give you. But any other data is going to be consistent with these boundaries, right? So if it moves down a little bit, you know the story's still going to be the same. So I didn't mean to be misleading about it. I think it's an easy way to convey a complicated story. But and I think that most people, when they hear 5% increase, they just think, oh, my goodness, we're all getting a 5%. I wanted a way to kind of convey that. On the issue of the middle class scholarship, it is true. There's a lot of conversation coming out of Sacramento right now. And one person has said, maybe one way that we can deal with this issue is to take away the middle class scholarship. So it's going to churn for a while, right? Do I think that there is political interest in the state of California for the legislature to take away the middle class scholarship? I don't think so. I could be wrong. And again, it gets back to the original question. Maybe there's some risk. But I really don't think that one of the things that's going to happen as a result of this is that the middle class scholarship is going to be taken away. But we're going to need to see over the next few months how the conversation unfolds. And again, if we didn't do this, there would also be a risk. But my judgment, and politics is, it's an interesting thing to watch, and it's not an algorithm. But this strikes me as changing the context in a favorable way for what we want to accomplish. And I appreciate you saying Sadia absolutely does not support the plan, voted against the plan. But when you ask her now, including in an interview she gave that was published today in the Los Angeles Times, do you support a tuition increase? She says, we need to get the state to give us more money. And that's where we agree. So the place where we disagree is this. First of all, you might disagree on the strategy. Is it a good idea to clarify for the people of California the relationship between state support and tuition? Now, I think we're a reality-based community, and I think that we can handle reality, and I think that it wasn't deeply understood within the political system what that relationship was. And what this plan does is that it puts that issue squarely on the table. And when you put reality squarely on the table, it's a helpful thing sometimes for conversations, not always, but sometimes. But where we agree is that the outcome that we want to have is to get that extra $100 million. So is my view that we should have a tuition increase? No. My view is that the state should buy out the tuition increase with an additional $100 million, because any dollar that you invest in the University of California is an investment that pays off multiple times for the well-being of the people of California. So I agree with that. The one place where we might disagree is this. If you can't get the state to give us more money, then do you do a tuition increase or not? And my view is, for reasons that I suggested earlier about the future direction of the University of California, I think that if there aren't new funds to sustain the traditional model of the university for this next generation of people coming into this university, I think it's going to harm the university. And I think that it's better for us to have a rational tuition plan that is really affecting primarily families making $175,000 a year or more to protect the greatness of the system than to simply allow for there to be no tuition, no additional state funds, and then sees what happens to the University of California. That is absolutely a legitimate point of disagreement that we would have. If there's an agreement, I hope the agreement is let's avoid that and get the state to come in. But it makes sense to me that you might have a different view. And up until now, the governor had a different view. But his view of no tuition increase and hardly any additional state money is a view to change the University of California. And my guess is that you're probably not supportive of that either. So
I think we have a few questions up here, too. So if Alvin or Nick want to reach out to them. Go ahead and put your hands up high so Alvin and Nick can see you.
Hi, my name is Chance. I've had the privilege of both being an undergrad here, and I'm currently a law student. So I've already gone through the experience of having my tuition go up every year, and now I'm under the gun of having it go up both in my supplemental tuition and the base UC-wide tuition. And I think I buy your guys' discussion here that this is really just the state not providing enough funding for it. But my biggest issue is the lack of clarity in what's going on. I mean, I really feel that this meeting is much too late and it hasn't been publicized enough. It's right in the middle of our finals. I mean, why is this taking place now instead of before the vote to increase the tuition?
Right. So the very first meeting of our student government leadership and me and some of the administrators this year in October had a great lunch. We meet once a month for lunch. The first thing student government leadership said is, everybody sees that the possibility of a tuition increase is coming. Janet Napolitano has signaled this for an entire year. And what we talked about was, if that's really going to be considered, what message do you want me to convey, the Office of the President? What should we be thinking about? And so we discussed it. One of the things that was discussed was, we're not going to support a tuition increase, but if you need it to enhance the educational experience, which is what's at stake, then you need not to be elusive about it. You need to be very clear about it. And you need to tell us how you're going to be investing it. So part of this is about being true to that conversation that we've had for a few months. But beyond that, we've all agreed that our Vice Chancellor for Budget and Planning and our interim provost and your student leaders are going to meet on a regular basis to continue to get input from you about how this will have a positive impact on the student experience, continue to report back to you. I've committed to ongoing meetings and ongoing conversations with students. Now, why in terms of the timing? Well, the budget cycle is the budget cycle. The governor submits his initial budget in January. The regents needed to have a point of view about this in the meeting before then. And so that was the November meeting. And we know that there's going to be an ongoing conversation. It's going to be months and months and months we're going to be talking about it. And you're going to be following what's going on in Sacramento. And there's going to be a little intrigue here, and it's going to look a little promising, and then somebody's going to say something here that's going to make you a little worried. It's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds. But we need to try to get right-sized in terms of our finances to protect the integrity of the system. And you're right. A lot of students have seen their tuition go up way too much. And I've demonstrated to you exactly how that worked. And especially since 2007, my view is students and their families, when things got tough, picked up the slack, did more than their fair share. The University of California also lowered the cost of education per student. And I can show you this. It's on the web. If you need help finding it, I'll find it for you. But we took $660 million of cost out of the University of California since 2007. $660 million of cost. And I wasn't here then, but some of you were here in 2007, 8, 9, 10. You know what happened on the campuses and how people were laid off and things had to get restructured. So we think we did an extraordinary effort to keep true to providing access to students. Students and their families have done more. What partner hasn't yet done more? The partner that hasn't yet done more is the state. So you've done all you should do. We're going to continue to find efficiencies, but we have done a lot already. None of this is going to get solved, though, unless the state begins to reinvest. And fundamentally, that's our hope, that this sets in motion a dynamic that gets us back on a path. And that's what it's intended to do. And I think that that's where we have common interest, even if there are still some issues where we have some disagreements.
I can understand where we have common interests, but I still feel like you've kind of dodged around my question at hand.
I'm sorry.
And that's, why has there been so little involvement of the student body in general? I mean, we can look around and there's almost no one here. And that's because it's in the middle of the law school's finals. It's right before the finals of the general population. And I'm just curious, I mean, why wasn't this done earlier? Why hasn't more been done to inform the student body? I mean, because our ability to influence government is limited now. The elections have already taken place. We can't vote Jerry Brown out of office. I mean, we're limited in what we can do now. So I'm curious, why wasn't this done much earlier?
So my view is that there have been conversations going on for a year where everyone who was watching the conversations, including all of your student leaders, knew that a tuition increase was being contemplated because the state hadn't stepped up. So the idea that everyone was simply, whistling down the street, no one was paying any attention, don't worry anyone, nothing to see here, and then suddenly out of the blue, bloom, this thing comes together, I think that that's not a fair or correct analysis of what's been true. And we have been talking about it. We've been talking about it with your student leaders. The plan itself is now the subject of these conversations. And I'm grateful that I have a chance to be here to talk to you. We can keep talking. We're going to keep talking with student leaders. There are deep conversations with student leadership around the system. And I think that we're going to find a place to work together. And so I do think that students saw what was happening. This specific plan is now going to be the subject of an ongoing debate and conversation. This is one example of it. And it won't be the last example of it. And so I feel as though if part of the concern isn't with whether this is a good plan or not, but whether the cake was baked in sort of the right way. My feeling is the general issue and concern about the lack of state support was there. We have been trying to talk to Sacramento about this. The specific issue of, well, maybe one way to shuffle the deck is that you clarify the relationship between these two things. And then let's see how that unfolds. That's something that happened quickly because you needed to get that issue before the regents in November so that the budget cycle that starts in January can get going. And so I know that maybe that's not a completely adequate response. I'm not trying to dance around it, but hopefully it's helpful and hopefully it's an ongoing conversation.
And just real quick to answer a little bit more on the student side. So for Sonali and I think it was mid-November, we were called upon by the University of California Office of the President to have a special meeting regarding tuition. So we have had this conversation, and year-long as student leadership is changing, from election cycle to election cycle. I know some of our branches in our office has been in NAS has been working very hard, consistently for years on tuition, right? So the process is going through that stage, and as well, when we were called to UCOP, we were engaging in that dialogue with them as well. And then it was until after the regents, voted on the tuition stability plan where it became something solidified, I think, and started catching more press attention by the general student bodies, right? Because until it goes past the plan, there's a tendency for us all not to really pick up on it until it actually becomes stamped, approved, and is about to go through. So to speak on the student perspective that both Sonali and I served on in that capacity.
So I do want to add on to what Reza mentioned and how we've been working with our campus leadership to look at what the proposal is and to look at what next steps are and will be. As Reza mentioned, a lot of these conversations about what the UC is facing financially have been started well in advance, long back, maybe I should say around September or so. But there was never a clear picture of what the tuition will be. There was never a talk on what, if there will be ever a tuition increase. There's always been a talk on what the financial model of the UC system looks like. So a lot of the administrators from UCOP, that's the Office of the President, talked to a lot of student leaders, both UCSA, University of California Student Association, and the Council of Student Body Presidents, to maybe give us enough information on what the UC system is currently at and what's the state at. And we've been in constant dialogue with them, with the administration, with our campus leaders to tell them what our student priorities are. We let them know well in advance that if there's any tuition plan or if there is any financial consideration that has to be put in place, all of the student priorities and the student needs should be prioritized first while the tuition is being formulated. And that's exactly what we did as student leaders, being in those spaces, having the students first, and talking about how this financial plan will impact our students. And we wanted to make sure that we bring all this information back from UCOP, from the discussions with our campus leadership, back to the students. And we've been constantly in conversations with a lot of our campus partners to discuss, even before a tuition vote even occurred, to have these brainstorming sessions. If in the future, next year, if something happens, if an N% tuition increase happens, how are we going to do and what are we going to do from a campus perspective? And from a campus, how can we go back to the system-wide and take all of this information again? We wanted to be a campus leader in setting that tone of let's change the dialogue of this new UC tuition model into focusing on student priorities. And that's exactly what Chancellor Gilman talked to us about, the slide about student priorities. We focused all this talk on how can we make sure we're focusing the energies and the new resources into different funds. Yes, we understand the feeling that a lot of us are not in those spaces, are not in the regents' meetings, are not in those behind closed doors to see how are these decisions being made. But we feel the need to get all of the information back and to bring and put our student priorities in the forefront. And that's what we've been doing, all the student leaders on campus and system-wide. And we wanted to make sure that this town hall is being arranged to provide a platform for all of you to not only ask questions, but to engage in the student priority dialogues. What do you all want to see from this tuition? Yes, if a tuition increase happens, if the student services fee increase happens, and it has been voted on, but now what? We have this state. What can we do from a campus perspective? What can we do from pressurizing the state, talking to a state legislator, pressurizing the governor? At all levels, we see a tiered approach that all students have to come around and gather around that single vision. I think we've come a long way, and there's still a long way for us to go.
All right, we're going to go back to questions now. So I think we have one over there in the housing staff jacket over there, and then one right here. You're next. You've had your hand up. Okay, so go ahead. Yeah.
Chancellor, do you think right now is the appropriate time for top administrators such as yourself to be getting raises?
So people can have different points of view about how much you should pay a chancellor. So the University of California is known throughout higher education as paying their campus leaders less, and in some cases significantly less, than every other comparable institution, than most other comparable institutions. And so there's 60 people who head up AAU research universities, such as myself. I'm privileged to do it. Almost all of them make more than me. But maybe you disagree, that even though I'm at the low end and they all make more than me, I should make even less. That could be a discussion. I do think there are people who think, including some of the elected officials, who want you to pay attention to that issue. And at the same time, those are the very same people that have not to date dealt with the $500 million issue, because I think they want you to pay attention to the rest of this. My view is, I think I'm compensated in a fair way. Michael Drake was the chancellor for a very long time. I'm making $70,000 more than he did. He was a chancellor here for about 9 years. Now, he left for the Ohio State University. He's making over $1 million. That's fine. Good luck to him. I think it's good for students. It's good for everybody there. And I'm happy that I have a chance to be on the different end of that spectrum. To be realistic about it, I think that part of what you need to consider when you're building a great university is how you bring in the sort of people who have helped create the greatness of the system up until now. Now, we do have a governor who over the years doesn't think, not just chancellors, has said he doesn't think faculty should be paid that much. In a very famous phrase, you can Google the phrase, when he was first governor, faculty in the University of California thought because we're world-class faculty, we should be paid an appropriate amount. He said, no, you shouldn't be paid so much, but what you should do is realize the psychic income associated with being part of the University of California. So maybe you can run a university based on paying everyone the amount of money you pay politicians plus their psychic income. But I don't know an example of a great research university has actually pulled that off. So from my point of view, the best that can be done is that the University of California try to be a national leader in keeping those salaries low in relationship to their peers and aspirational peers. But I don't think that we're completely immune when it comes to chancellor salaries, when it comes to hiring faculty, when it comes to hiring chief information officers, when it comes to hiring neurosurgeons. I don't think that we're immune from what's going on more generally in higher ed. And some of the people who have focused the most on that as the problem are also the people who have a different vision of where the University of California should go, which is a very different kind of institution. So from my point of view, we've created an institution that is as good as you can get in terms of academic quality, student experience, access, mobility, diversity. Any challenge President Obama wants to give to American higher education about how to do better, we've already blown through every single marker you could make. The idea that at this institution, half of all of our students are first-generation college students, about 43% are Pell-eligible low-income students. We almost serve more low-income students at this institution than the entire Ivy League combined. And it's the glory of what we do, that we can combine excellence with that mission. And it's been done on the basis of a certain kind of management model. So you could make a gesture or focus on this issue. It's not going to solve this problem. I'm not embarrassed by the amount of money that I make. And I think it's natural that when a chancellor has been in place for a very long time and you recruit a new person in, over 9 years, things change. And I don't think it should be a source of outrage that the bar has been moved a little bit, but we're still trying really hard to stay on the right end of that spectrum. So I don't know if that's responsive, but it's certainly my view of it.
We have a question right here. He's been waiting for a while. So,
hi, my name's Joseph. I'm
Joseph.
a graduate student here.
Yeah.
And I have 3 questions.
Okay.
So the first question has to do with this graph here.
Okay.
So, so as I understand it, basically for lower income students, you're going to be giving them more financial aid, and well, of course, still having the tuition increase for the higher income students. So now I don't have any problem with that. I mean, I'd like it better
Yeah.
if no one got a tuition increase. But
me
okay.
too.
But
Yeah.
anyway, but I'm wondering how the math works out here, because presumably the whole point of a tuition increase is to increase the net amount of money that the university is taking in.
Yeah.
So I mean, but if you're increasing financial aid to certain students, then of course that's being paid for at least indirectly through
Yeah.
the tuition. So I'm just wondering. So my first question is about how that works out, the math. My second question has to do with you said that the governor he said he didn't want to support give more financial support to the UC because he wanted it to move in a different direction in terms of having more like online classes and more 2-year degrees. Okay,
Yeah.
so I think I have in my mind an idea of why he wants that, but I'm wondering if you could say something about why you think he thinks that's a good
Yeah.
idea for. Okay, and my third question is about graduate students. So I'm in my 5th year right now, and I'm pretty much on my way out. I have my dissertation year fellowship next year, so I'm not really going to be affected by any of this.
Yeah.
But there are probably some graduate students watching this, and so I just wanted to ask, for the record, how are graduate students going to be affected by all this? Because I noticed this graph is in terms of parent income. Well, so
Yeah.
a lot of graduate students aren't really
Yeah.
supported by their parents, right?
Right.
So, I mean, how are they going to be affected by this?
So first question was
Okay, so how does the math work?
math work, right.
Yeah.
So the basic way the math works is we need X number of dollars. We're asking for X, 1.3X of extra tuition so that a third of the extra tuition goes into financial aid. We have a policy called the Return to Aid Policy. 33% of all tuition dollars are set aside by the University of California for financial aid. And the impact that has on access and availability is sort of what you see here. I don't remember the total system-wide pool of money for financial aid, 900 million, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's one of the largest financial aid pools. It's one of the reasons why we can do that. So we can get you more information about the details, but the concept is not that we're asking in tuition the amount of money that we think we need to maintain quality and then suddenly not using it. We're asking for a bit more with the understanding that a lot of that money then gets diverted to ensure the access mission, and then the rest of that delta. One of the things that you'll see, for example, quickly in one of the charts is when you look at, as of last year, the how much of your education is supported by the state, how much is supported by tuition. Tuition's not $8,800, right? But these are the dollars from tuition that are used to support the educational mission. The other 4,000, give or take, is designed to go into access, right? So that could be a little bit responsive. We can get you more information about how all the math works out, but that's a 30,000-foot sort of explanation for the math. I know the last point's graduate students. Second point.
So why do you think?
Oh, why the governor?
Yeah.
So I think the governor and the lieutenant governor believe that the future of higher education is toward innovative ways of delivering education. So they talk a lot about online as very important. Now, we all think sometimes online is great, but we, as a research university with talented faculty, sit down and we say to people, do you want to do some online as part of your course? They do it. It's usually more expensive, right, than not doing it if you're doing it right. So there's a little bit of an infatuation with a future-oriented notion of the delivery of higher ed. And the governor's view is that, and this isn't wrong, is that states make mistakes by creating very expensive institutions. And the governor has done a good job getting an out-of-control state budget in control. And he's always been a fairly frugal person, even his own personal habits. And I think his view is that if you're really going to create a structure that serves large numbers of students, you need to change the cost model. And changing the cost model is online, more 2-3-year degrees, and more faculty effort in relationship to teaching. And that makes the whole thing less expensive. And so that's not a crazy idea. I think it doesn't understand the University of California, or if it understands the University of California, it doesn't have confidence that the University of California has a future on the basis of the model that has served Californians for decades and decades. And so I think it's a disagreement in principle among well-intentioned people about whether you can sustain this sort of enterprise. Our belief is that you can sustain this sort of enterprise. We're not talking about the state giving us an extra $2 billion a year so that we can keep cranking along. We're talking about a university that does it better than anyone, and with a state that has billions of extra dollars, $100 million additional dollars this year buys out whatever tuition increase. And I think that that's taking into account not only the educational mission, but the research mission, the mission of commercialization and tech transfer, the economic impact that it has on the state. I don't remember exactly the statistic, but for low-income students who graduate from the University of California, within 3 years, they're making more than their families. And so taking all of that into account, that $100 million is an investment in the wealth and well-being of the university. As for graduate students, it impacts graduate students differently depending on what kind of degree program. So for some graduate students, PhD students in particular, tend to already have a lot of their fees taken care of. There is effort especially to deal with, sometimes you get that offer as part of a PhD program. Sometimes people put things on grants. So PhD students, the finances of that are a little bit different. The impact that it has on professional degree students rather than PhD students is different. And when we evaluate professional degree, supplemental tuition, and the like, in some cases we think, you're paying more money, but your opportunities for making income are very, very high, so the return on investment is still high. In other cases we think, well, you're trying to go into a field of work where the income isn't so high, and so you can't make people go into a lot of debt, and so you need a return to aid formula, even if you're going to be increasing in general the tuition. So it's handled differently, and there's a process on the campus when programs are suggesting increases in that for whether they get justified or not. Graduate students weigh in. All of that becomes part of the mix. So graduate students, depending on where you are, affected differently. But in general, the tuition increase is an increase for not just undergrads, but for the cost of going to the University of California.
So for the interest of time and the amount of time we have left for this room, we're actually going to be taking 2 more questions. So we've gone and fielded those.
All right. Thanks for elaborating on graduate students. I have 2 more constituencies of graduate students. How are master's students? They're paying $10,000, $11,000. Will they see a 5% increase? And how will this also affect international students, increase the number of international students?
Yeah.
And also, will this affect quality of PhD programs in which they have to shell out more money for graduate students?
So the base tuition plus the supplemental degree professional tuition would both go up. Right, so that does apply to graduate students as well. In terms of the impact that it's going to have on PhD programs, the whole point is to increase the value of all of these programs. So among other things, for example, you hire more faculty. That's in the high-quality faculty. That's in the interest of everyone. And so there's a lot of interest on the undergraduate side, and we've been focusing a lot on the undergraduate side about some of the specific metrics we're putting into place about quality of impact. But our intention is for the entire academic research experience of the campus to continue to be improved, but find the resources necessary to allow us to continue to be the University of California.
International students too?
International students also up. The non-resident supplemental tuition is also folded into that. Different programs, especially PhD programs, sometimes deal with that issue in a different way. So the PhD thing is a very different dynamic. Even if you didn't have this debate, if we were having a conversation about the financial model with respect to PhD students, it would look a little bit differently. But, and we can get you more information as you delve more deeply into it. But generally speaking, the cost of being educated at the University of California, assuming the state doesn't give us the $100 million, and by the way, if the state doesn't give us $100 million, for every $20 million of additional dollars they give us, we knock down the tuition by 1%. So, you know, you can do a deal with the state where if they give you $60 million, then it's a 2% increase and it would have some of these dividing. I think we're not going to get there, but if it does get there, it does apply to the cost of the University of California in general. So thanks for asking.
All right, and our final question.
Hi, my name's Pai. I'm a public health major here. I think I somewhat represent the general populace as somewhat uninformed, but specifically interested in this topic.
Okay.
My question for you is, I agree that proposed tuition increases and similar sound bites have been effective in bringing attention to the requirement for increased state funding. What would you say to comfort students who feel like a bargaining chip, those who have made a lot of noise about this issue and feel like the burden for activism should fall on those working for us as a product of this institution rather than a customer? Is shifting the burden onto students some type of last resort? And has there been exploration into options and initiatives beside increases in tuition? And if so, how can those efforts be communicated to the student body?
So I don't think that it's fair to say that this issue is using students as a bargaining chip. And here's why that's not my view of it. Maybe we have different view. The truth of the matter is, unless you want to transform what the University of California is like in the direction that some people have talked about, the University of California needs $100 million a year extra funds in the years to come. And so that is either going to come through tuition increases, as has been the case for 10, 20, 30 years. So it's not a different story, right? We could either talk about it or not talk about it. But it will happen one way or the other unless we're deciding to change the University of California. And so from my point of view, that's just an honest description of where we are. And my hope is that by clarifying that relationship, we make it more likely that the tuition increase doesn't have to happen. But make no mistake, and I don't want to be elusive about this. If the state doesn't give us more money, I really want to fight in the long run for the greatness of the University of California system, and I am supportive of that tuition increase. So it's not just putting you in the middle, but I think it's showing a relationship that we all know is true anyway, and it's not putting you in the middle or treating people as pawns to tell the truth. But doing it in this way focuses the conversation in a way that I think is politically beneficial. Maybe, maybe not, but my view is that this gives us a much better chance than was the case last year. On other ways to deal with the issue, the University of California has lots, as part of the presentation to the regents, there's been a lot of information about alternative things that the campuses have done and continue to do, and other models that were contemplated but rejected. So for example, a differential tuition model that if you want to study engineering, you pay this amount, and if you want to study art history, you pay that amount. A number of other models were contemplated and rejected. And if you ask us, send us a note, we can get you links to some of those other scenarios. The main other thing that the University of California has done is become more efficient in delivering the educational experience. And by more efficient, it means it is less expensive for us as a system to educate an individual student than it was a number of years ago. We have, and we can document this line by line, and if you need the documentation, write to me, chancellor@uci.edu, and we'll send you a link. We have $660 million of documented savings that we've already put in place, and an ongoing process to identify some other savings. And so that's been done. And it's because we've done that, that from my point of view, if you're contemplating a tuition increase, this one is more modest than the ones that we've seen in the past. I'm not saying you should like it. I'm not saying that 5% doesn't matter. But these campuses have gone through 30, 40% tuition increases, sometimes in a very unexpected way. So the reason why we've been able to put what I think is a more modest than some of the historic plan on the table is because the University of California has done a lot already to make sure that we don't just have to say to the state, let's just go back to where we were before. But there's only so much you can do if there's a $500 million gap. And so this is designed to fill that last portion of it. And if you need more information, send me a note, and we'll send you the links to the more information. There's also on the University of California Office of the President website, lots of information. Stay in touch with your student leaders. We want to make sure if there's still things you're confused about, that at least you have the available facts. And I just want to thank you so much for listening and for allowing us to have a great conversation, and we'll keep the conversation going. And very grateful to Sonali and Reza for putting this together. And, good luck on finals, right? So, and if I don't see you before, Happy New Year, and we'll see you next year.
Thank you so much,
Thanks a lot.
Chancellor Gilman.
Okay.
And thank you all of you for taking the time to come for our discussion today. And if there are any additional questions, please find me and Reza after the town hall meeting, and we'll clarify some of the questions and relay back all these questions back to our campus leadership. And also we'll make sure that all the information that you saw in front of you today, the presentation is made public. We'll send out notes in a campus email pretty soon by the end of this week. So thank you so much. And if there are any additional questions, please find us after. Thank you.
Oh, and